Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan, who I've been practicing law for 26 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. I often write about this stuff for places like roadandtrack.com, and I've written a few books as well. Today we're going to talk about when your truck crashes through the ice and sinks. When your truck crashes through the ice and sinks. Of course, what we're talking about here is a lot of times people will see a frozen lake and they want to go fishing, ice fishing in particular, and rather than walking out to their ice shanty, they will drive out to it and leave their truck parked on the ice next to their place. And occasionally we hear about these vehicles going through the ice. And if the water is deeper than the truck is tall, the trucks will often go all the way to the bottom and sink. Hey, gravity will do that. So what you need to know when your truck crashes the ice and sinks, and what you might need to know to try to avoid that, because it's bizarre. This happens quite a bit, especially in the Midwest, but I suspect it also happens probably in Europe. If people drive their vehicles in the ice, once in a while something's going to happen. The vehicle's going to go through the ice. I don't know how the law applies over there, but what we're talking about, generally speaking, is going to be good in most of the states in the Midwest: Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Every year, it seems, we see stories about people who brought their vehicles out on the ice and they went through. We also hear about, by the way, people who go out on the ice when the weather's breaking up. And hey, it's a great day to go fishing. I don't need to wear a jacket. And then they wind up out in the middle of the St. Clair River because the ice broke up and started drifting down the river. And next thing you know, they're calling 911 saying, hey, I need to be helicoptered out of here, one of those really cool Coast Guard helicopters. And people always wonder, why don't we make people pay for that? Another story altogether. Today we're talking about when your truck crashes through the ice and sinks. And the big question people always ask me about, and by the way, there's a lot of misunderstanding on this because I've had a lot of people tell me automatically if your vehicle goes through the ice, you just lost out because your insurance is not going to cover you. And that's an interesting question because it's going to depend on your policy. So I went and looked this up to double check to also see what some of the experts say about this. And I'll admit that I got a lot of my information from carinsurance.com. But I've double checked a lot of this and it makes sense to me. But for instance, they state in an article that where ice fishing is big, dozens of vehicles go through the ice in a normal winter. Okay, normal winter, dozens of vehicles through the ice. For instance, Minnesota tracks just fatalities, that is, people who get killed on the ice. And in 2013, for instance, 4 deaths were the result of vehicles going through the ice. And they've been keeping statistics since 1976. And since then, 49 people have died because their vehicles went through the ice, presumably with them in the vehicle. But of course, for every person who got killed, there are probably many, many more vehicles that went through the ice with nobody in it. In other words, I park the vehicle on the ice, I get out, I'm fishing, all of a sudden I turn around because I hear a loud crash and my truck is gone. That's now under the ice. Which is only funny if it's not your truck. Okay, if it is your truck, it's not funny. In some instances, they've documented dozens of vehicles going through the ice all at once. At a recent ice fishing tournament at Lake Winnebago, yes, that's a real place, Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin, 36 ice fisher people came back to find their vehicles through the ice. While most trucks were only up to their wheels in water, 18 were fully submerged. So in other words, they were parked on ice that was not that deep with the water beneath it, and a bunch of them went through, but many of them could simply be yanked out, but some of them had actually gone all the way under. Now, the first thing you need to think about in this day and age is if your vehicle goes through the ice, or actually, just let's suppose you're in Florida and you're one of these people, perhaps because you've been drinking too much, who can't keep your vehicle out of the canal, okay? You're driving along one day and for whatever reason, you put your vehicle in the canal, okay? Your vehicle's in the water. Most states say that you cannot park your vehicle in the water, okay? It makes sense because there's ecological concerns. Your vehicle's got gasoline in it, which is not good for the environment. It's got oil in it, not good for the environment in that situation. It's got antifreeze in it, probably. Florida might not, but in other states it would. Again, not good for the environment. And chances are trans fluid, things of that nature. A lot of stuff, battery acid. So when you put your vehicle in the water, the state's going to require you to get your vehicle out of the water. And by the way, if you make them do it, it's going to cost more. You want to get it out yourself. So in some states, like Wisconsin, you've got 30 days to get your vehicle out of the water. Don't let it go that long, okay? Some of this stuff is actually damaging to the environment. Now, the problem, of course, is if you put your vehicle in a canal in Florida, it's probably easier to get out because the canals often aren't as deep as the lakes are in Wisconsin. But you put your vehicle in the water, you want to get it out as quickly as possible to avoid getting afoul of state officials who are going to say, hey, by the way, when you put your vehicle in the water, it caused us to have cleanup costs, for instance. You don't want that to happen. Now, here's the question. How do you get your truck out of the water if it's in 10 feet of water 100 yards offshore in Lake Winnebago or such? And carinsurance.com did a quick survey of people who retrieve vehicles from beneath the ice. The cost can range, and I was surprised at how little this was. The cost can range from $1,000 to $5,000, depending on the size of the vehicle and the depth at which it sank. So here's the question: like, let's suppose you drove it on Lake Michigan and put it in like 50 feet of water. That's got to cost more than $5,000, don't you think? I have to imagine it does. This estimate of $1,000 to $5,000 came from a guy who owns a company that does nothing but, apparently, do diving to retrieve things from the bottoms of lakes where people have put them by accident. He says that in an average year, his company removes or retrieves 30 to 45 objects out of lakes each year. 30 to 45. Now, those aren't all cars. They could be trucks. They could be snowmobiles. A lot of snowmobiles go through the ice. And other things. A lot of people think that you're a snowmobile moving really, really fast, okay? If the ice breaks beneath you, you'll be okay because the broken ice will be behind you. But that's, of course, assuming you stand the same plane, okay? You're going this way. You're not going down into the lake. He says every job is different with respect to how you get the vehicle off the bottom of the lake. On average, an extraction involves 5 or 6 people, takes between 4 and 8 hours, and the extraction method depends on the conditions of the ice. Herman has a variety of methods and equipment at his disposal. In one situation, we had to cut a path through the ice for almost a half a mile and pull the vehicle out that way. So, of course, I suspect that's more than a $5,000 repair cost. Meanwhile, every company has different methods. Another guy who runs a company out of Nisswa, Minnesota, gotta love the names up there. And the Upper Peninsula's got great names too, of Michigan. He explained his process, and he says that if the ice has recovered to where it's now 13 inches thick or better, he'll bring a crane out on the ice with a special thing it stands on, a pedestal, which evenly distributes its weight and allows him to lift the vehicle off the bottom of the lake right then and there, using the ice as a platform. They cut a 12 by 12 hole in the ice, they drop a scuba diver down, and they put a cable around the vehicle, and they winch the vehicle out. And he says that's how he does it. But again, this is not easy, and it's not something you can do yourself. But for those of you who are curious, these vehicles are totaled, okay? You can't repair one of these vehicles. And if your insurance company suggests it, call an attorney. Because if you think about it, you put your vehicle underwater for, a couple days, you aren't going to be able to dry it out. It's going to come up off the bottom with fish in it, carp, and things of that nature. And so the real question is this. If you had comprehensive insurance on your vehicle, and I hope you did, if you put it down at the bottom of the lake, your comprehensive coverage might cover this because it's not collision damage and so on. So the real question is, do you have comprehensive coverage on your vehicle? Because if you don't, you're just out of luck, okay? I mean, your basic PLPD or whatever you call it in your state that allows you simply to drive your vehicle is not going to cover this, nor is collision, because this isn't a collision between you and another vehicle. It's, something happened while your vehicle is probably parked. So comprehensive. Now, here's the big question, is whether or not your insurance policy says anything about taking your vehicle off-road and what happens if you're off-road. Because some policies are okay with it. If you took the vehicle off-road and you simply drove yourself out on the ice, parked it, got out and you're fishing, and you were simply doing that, okay? Now, many policies, and this is the one most people know about, have a restriction against racing, if you're racing your vehicle. So if you're out on the ice and you're racing your vehicle for whatever reason, okay, let's suppose it's, you're out there racing some other guy in another truck around a big circle, and someone videotapes this and they can prove it. Your claim will be denied simply because you're racing. Not because you're on the ice, but because you're racing. But here's the question, and this is the big thing, and this is according to a consumer analyst with carinsurance.com, Penny Guzner. She points out that there are different exclusions from different companies. They all read differently. And some policies do have exclusions specifically for off-road recreational activity. And parking on the ice, you're off the road, and you're ice fishing, it's recreational. So if you have an exclusion that says specifically, we will not cover you if you are doing something recreational with your vehicle off-road, that claim will be denied. Now, here's the big question. If, like on The Simpsons, you drove your vehicle onto the ice by accident, hey, it happens, and you came to a stop on the ice, and before you could get off the ice, your car went through, and luckily you all got out, that wouldn't be recreational driving of the vehicle on the ice. That would be an accident. You slid through a stop sign, slid out on the ice. I mean, that's possible, right? But if you drove it out on the ice on your own, simply to get yourself to your ice shanty, and you're fishing out there and it went through the ice, well, that'd be recreational use of the vehicle off-road. So find out if your vehicle's got that type of exemption on it, because if it does, you probably shouldn't drive your vehicle off-road, particularly onto ice, which might cave in beneath you and put your vehicle on the bottom of the lake. Now, I will tell you that scientists every year are consulted to explain what's safe or unsafe about driving on ice, okay? And I was actually watching one of those Ice Road Truckers shows a few years ago, and I saw them crossing a river someplace up in the Yukon. And it's kind of interesting because I was always wondering, do people ever drive across icy rivers versus icy lakes? And I'd never heard of it until I saw it in that show, and I guess it makes sense. But so the ice, a lot of people simply think is just frozen water, and if you have frozen water and it's ice in a certain thickness, we can just go out and drive on it, right? I mean, doesn't that seem to make logical sense? Well, logical sense, yeah, but science will tell you otherwise. And so there are actually people out there who study frozen water. I'm not sure what that name of that field is. I'm sure somebody can tell me. But one thing that scientists will tell you, and this is not me getting political here, but due to recent fluctuations in the Earth's atmospheric temperatures, I'll avoid using any of the hot button phrases. The ice season is getting shorter on average, okay? So in other words, they say if you went back and looked historically at when the ice froze over on Lake Winnebago, to use an example, it's now freezing a little bit later in the year than it used to. And it's also thawing a little bit earlier than it used to. So those old school guys that go, hey, I remember we used to be able to go on the ice the first week of November. There's always a big, nice, thick sheet of ice. You can't count on the historical data because the historical data is not the same as it is today. So that's getting shorter. But believe it or not, most ice-related deaths come earlier in the season than they do later in the season. And I would have guessed it was the other way around, because I would have guessed that people want to get out there one last time, especially on that nice sunny day. The first nice sunny day, you've had a cold snap for 3 weeks and then a sunny day. There's still 2 feet of ice out there. I would think people would go out there on that and somehow screw up. But it turns out that people are just eager to get out there and get their ice fishing in. So the second the ice looks like it's thick enough, people race out on the lake, and that's when most people go through, according to the experts. A meteorologist, who I guess might be the guy who studies frozen water, Aaron Kennedy of the University of North Dakota, said freezing and refreezing in the spring makes dangerous ice. So what happens is the ice is out there. It's out there all winter long, nice and thick. You get a warm spell, which causes it to thaw a little bit, and then it freezes again. People go, oh, it's frozen again. And they assume that the ice is the same after the thaw as it was before the thaw. And Aaron Kennedy, meteorologist at University of North Dakota, said that's not the case. Okay, that thawing, refreezing cycle doesn't make the ice brand new. He says, in fact, it makes it kind of iffy. You got to be careful about it. A professor named John Gulliver at the University of Minnesota said that as temperatures warm, ice gets it mushy. And it doesn't get thin, it gets mushy. Now, apparently that's a term of art. He used the word twice in the same sentence. But mushy ice breaks easier, according to Professor John Gulliver. And it makes sense that it would, but again, you know, we've all walked on frozen ice. I hope. I know I did when I was younger. You're walking along. Sometimes you have that really cool ice you can see through, you know, and this once in a while it gets cloudy, and then you're on the mushy stuff, and you wonder how thick is the ice below the mush, and you never really know. The DNR in Minnesota revised recommendations for ice depth. They say a minimum of 5 inches is needed to walk on fresh, clear ice. So the ice, if you can actually see how thick the ice is, it needs to be at least 5 inches. But if you're going to drive a truck onto it, 12 to 15 inches, okay? And that's everywhere you're driving, okay? So in other words, it better be the same thickness, not just where you get on the ice, but also where you're going to park it, okay? 12 to 15 inches. The DNR in Minnesota says you might want to double those numbers to be on the safe side. In other words, it should be 24 to 30 inches thick if you want to put your vehicle on it and really be safe. And if it was me, I'd want to be safe. Or I'd make sure I've got the coverage that says it's okay if I park my truck on the ice for recreational purposes. But Gulliver, who's a professor, says one of the problems comes, and this is one of those things you don't think about until you're told to think about it, is when you drive a vehicle on ice. You're driving along on ice. You know that if you push a boat through water or a canoe, there is a bow wave. That's the wave that gets formed in front of the vehicle as it pushes through the water. And it creates a bow wave in front of the vehicles, pushing the water out of the way, and the water creates a wave that goes up. Faster the boat, bigger the wave. Wave theory. So if you are driving on ice, the professor points out that you're going to also create a bow wave in the ice, okay? So you put a very, very heavy truck on thin ice and you're driving fast, you might actually cause a bow wave to form in the water and the ice in front of the vehicle. And the bow wave, of course, is going to be impacting the ice. So he says that one thing you need to do is drive more slowly. It actually makes a difference. A lot of people, I would suspect, would think counterintuitively that you should drive more quickly. Okay, they think quickly, get there quickly, and you'll have less fear of falling through the ice. But the counterintuitive part is no, you drive slowly because you don't want to create that bow wave. Because as he points out, each vehicle that passes over the ice impacts that structural integrity. So if some other knuckleheads drove out there fast before you and made it safely, they may have made it safely, but they may have damaged the ice in the process. Okay, so beware of the bow wave. And he also suggests that if you have an ice house, I like to call them shanties, but you can call them ice houses, out on the ice, he goes, don't park near it. And again, makes sense. If the house weighs something and the truck weighs something, putting them closer together in the ice is putting more stress on the ice. So park them a little distance apart, and that'll actually help you a little bit. And he also says that there are all kinds of things that affect how fast the ice melts, and it's almost all unpredictable in the amount of melt you're going to get. Spring rain can do it, but he points out things that, like currents underneath the ice that you might not know about. If you're on a river, obviously there's a current, but a lake. He says there's all kinds of things happening under the water that can cause warmth to come up, and it might be cold air above, but the water might be getting warmer. So again, keep in mind that it's usually in the springtime, the end of winter, when more vehicles go through the ice. So if you're going to be on the ice, be careful. Drive slowly. Don't park near your ice shanty. And don't just assume because a bunch of other people drove on the ice, it must be safe. But before you do any of that, check your insurance policy and see what it says about recreational driving of your vehicle off-road. And you got to make sure that you don't have that exclusion, because if you do, don't take your vehicle out on the ice, because when it goes through, you might just kiss it goodbye. So that's when your truck crashes to the ice and sinks. Questions or comments, shoot them my way. As always, lehtoslaw.com, LEHTOSLAW.com. I'm on Twitter, at Steve Lehto, at STEVELEHTO. And this show is on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, and millions of others, as well as YouTube. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.